And you've just heard 20 Years Too Soon, 20 Years Too Late by Swimmer One from the album Outliers. And I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Eaton Lewis from the band now. Hello, Andrew.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And there's so much to talk to you about. I'm not quite sure where to start, but let's give us a bit of a history about Swimmer One. That might be a good place.
Oh, gosh, that's a difficult one. We started in 2002. Me and Hamish Brown, we met when we were both working for the same newspaper, for the Sunday Herald, which I don't think exists anymore. And a friend of ours called Simon said, "You two should meet each other. You would get on." And we both discovered that we'd been making kind of individually. We've not had much luck with bands for the most part, but we've been individually kind of making hours and hours and hours of demos. And so we kind of swapped sort of home recordings, and yeah, just found that we sort of clicked. And then we eventually got around to making this a debut single, which we spent ages on. We spent about a year making this single. We just make music for ourselves and put it out by ourselves. And then, yeah, it sort of took off. I guess, Mark Radcliffe played it on his Radio 1 afternoon show, and then Steve Lamacq and Rob DeBank and a few other people and Vic Galloway as well, Jim Gilletly, all sort of championed it at the same time. And I remember thinking, God, this is easy. So, and then what you discover is that, having one single on the radio for a couple of weeks does not make, does not make anything happen, really. You are kind of briefly being talked about, and then you disappeared. And then it took us about, I think, a year to make our second single and 5 years to make our album. It's just, yeah. And 3 years after that to do a live show as well. I remember when the single first came out, we had this nice woman fly up from London to meet us. She was from this new record label, and she seemed quite interested in us, and she asked all these questions. We had a lovely lunch in Leith and talked about the Human League. And then she asked us if we had any other songs, and we said, well, not really. We've mostly been working on this. We don't have a live show. We don't have anything really. We just sort of got started, and then she went away, and we didn't hear from her again. And that sort of moment passed. So from then on, anyway, yeah, I've sort of gone off on a bit of a tangent here, but from then on, we became this band who were, I don't know, we got very good reviews. There were a few kind of DJs who really championed us, but we were sort of floating around on the sidelines for quite a while. I mean, I had a couple of albums out. We Regional Variations in 2007, another one, Dead Orchestras, in 2010, and we did a big music and theatre project called Whatever Gets Through the Night with Cora Bissett and David Gregg and loads of Scottish musicians, which is a really fun project to do. And then we sort of stopped, largely because we all had kids, mm-hmm. and all had small children, and that tends to be not very compatible with being in a band. And since then, I mean, we're all still. Two of us are married. I should mention that Laura Cameron Lewis joined the band in 2007, just before the release of our first album. So then a trio from that point on for 5 years. And we're still all very close. We work on lots of different projects together, just not in a band. But yeah, we do lots of things separately. You can tell I haven't rehearsed all that.
It's interesting you talk about your debut single, We Just Make Music for Ourselves, which we'll hear after we've stopped talking. And then it took a year to make, because I think you can hear that. It's a really, for a debut release, it's quite a sophisticated pop song, for want of a better term. There's a lot going on in there, I think. A lot of influences as well, I think.
Oh, God, yeah. I remember when Mark Radcliffe played it on the radio, he kind of reeled off this whole list of bands that it reminded him of. He said it sounded like the Blue Nile and Pulp. I think he mentioned Bell and Sebastian and Elbow. And then he mentioned The Who. And I had to look up this reference. He said it sounded like Baba O'Reilly by The Who, and I had to listen to that, and yeah, it did. But we're one of these bands that always got compared to loads of very, very different bands, and I always took that as a compliment. If everybody says you sound like one particular band, if everyone says you sound like Oasis, or everyone says you sound like whoever, then maybe you're not doing something that original. But I don't know. on the one hand, it was quite flattering that people compared us to loads of different things, and on the other hand, yeah, we always sort of felt like outliers. We felt a bit niche because we didn't really know where we fitted. You know, you get one song played on the you get one song played on the radio, and then people go to try, you know, listen to your other stuff, and they found that it didn't sound like anything at all, the thing that they've just heard. So I think that probably threw people a little bit.
Yeah, because I was thinking, I would never make a connection between Pulp and the Blue Nile, but when you listen to it, you can see what he's talking about, what Mark Radcliffe was kind of talking about there.
Well, maybe we managed to find some kind of midpoint between all these bands. Yeah.
And so you've got 3 albums just released, and talk about those if you can, and why you've decided to put them out again now.
Yeah, kind of a glut of releases. Well, I mean, Hamish had always kind of produced. I mean, from the beginning, at the beginning when we started, we'd worked with other producers, and gradually, kind of Hamish was learning his craft as a producer, and mostly produced the second album himself. And he's a bit of a perfectionist, shall we say? And there are lots of things looking back he wished he'd done a bit better, and so he'd been in the process, really just as a personal project, of remastering all of our old stuff, and he kept sending me new versions of it, and then yeah, we realized that we were coming up to the 20th anniversary of this first single, so we started to think, well, maybe we should put all this stuff out again. And kind of in the process of doing that, we realized we'd lost the original vocals for some of the really early recordings. We had to re-record that, and so there was a reason to kind of get back together and do all that, and fix a few other things that we weren't quite happy with. And through the process of that, we ended up coming up with this new song, which is actually, music is mostly Hamish's work. I mean, it was a demo that he put together for something else, and it just seemed to fit quite well with some ideas that Laura and I had that we thought might make a nice song. So yeah, I mean, it was just kind of wanting to put out new, improved versions of all this old stuff with and have a kind of second chance to put it out in the world again.
And that new song was 20 Years Too Soon, 20 Years Too Late, which we've just heard. How was it going back to this music that you'd made, you know, a while ago now?
Yeah, it was really enjoyable. Yeah, I don't feel like it's massively dated. I mean, we got a lovely review the other day saying that it still sounds like the future, which I took as a big compliment. I mean, because I don't think we particularly sounded like anything else that was going on at the time, and so you know, you don't listen to this song and you immediately think, wow, that sounds like 2002.
Yeah,
and I suppose that since we came along, I mean, yeah, I mean. There were lots of bands after us that were sort of Scottish bands who were doing sort of electro pop type stuff, or were doing kind of a little bit. I'm not saying we influenced anyone. I don't think we did, but by coincidence, I think the kind of things, the kind of music we were interested in, the kind of music we were influenced by, has, I think, become fashionable again, perhaps. And so I think it still sounds really contemporary, this music.
I would agree with you, absolutely. So talk a little bit about each album and how you would describe them, because they've got their own identity.
Oh, good Lord. Okay. Well, there was the regional variations that came out in 2007. That was really a labor of love. It took us 5 years to make. And I don't know, I find it very difficult to talk about our own stuff in this way, because I find that usually when I read reviews or hear other people's opinions, they describe it much better than I could. But I mean, I suppose I could talk about the title.
Yeah.
Was that it was based on, you know, when I was growing up in Carlisle in the north of England, I remember looking at TV listings, and they had, you know, the stuff you could see in London on TV, and then you had the regional variations.
Yeah.
You know? and this I don't know, it just felt like the implication was that all this other stuff wasn't quite as good, you know, that the news where you are, and anyway, I don't know, I also thought the regional variations sounded a little bit like a piece of classical music or something, like the Enigma variations, and so it became this, if there's a theme running through this first album, it's the sort of feeling a bit like an outsider, or feeling like you kind of don't fit in the mainstream, or with whatever that is, or wherever that is. And so there's a bit of that kind of going on. Dead Orchestras, that came out 3 years later. That was, I mean, I'm still very proud of that album. I think it's quite a strange album, because it goes off in all these kind of radically different directions, because I think we were never quite sure what kind of band we wanted to be and what kind of music we wanted to be, and we sort of were constantly trying different things all the time. And Dead Orchestras was kind of the pinnacle of that, in that, one minute we're doing this very I mean, when you played a song from it on your show the other week, which was this 12 minutes sort of orchestral electro epic, which was went a bit over the top with that one. And so we were doing, I mean, that whole thing of, are we Pulp, are we the Blue Nile, are we Bell and Sebastian, are we Elbow, are we whoever we are? We were being all those things simultaneously, particularly on that second album, and it was all over the place musically. And I'm still very proud of it. I think people were probably a bit perplexed by it. I remember Gideon Coe played, the first song he played on his Six Music show from that album was Here's Your Train, Safe Home, which is this very kind of delicate, very quiet, acoustic ballad that sort of goes off into Michael Nyman territory. And if you listen to that song and you decide to buy the album on that basis, then you probably got angry and disappointed, because nothing else on the entire album sounds anything like that. And I remember being really grateful to Gideon for playing the song, but also a bit concerned, because that was not the song that I would think anyone would have played. So yeah, it was always very hard to predict what people would like. So yeah, we did the Dead Orchestras, and that took a long time. It was a real labor of love. And then we didn't really do anything after. No, we did the Whatever Gets Through the Night big project, and then things sort of fizzled out just because we had other things on our lives. But yeah, both albums got great reviews and didn't sell very well. Yeah, I remember telling somebody years ago, so just popped into my head. I remember telling a friend years ago that I really wanted to be in a cult band, because that would be a fun thing to be. And she just laughed at me and said, "That's ridiculous. Nobody ever wants to be in a cult band. People want to be in a successful band, And being in the cult band that's what happens when that doesn't work." So I probably had my priorities all kind of all over the place. I just wanted to make something really kind of a bit different and a bit unusual. And I suspect I in particular kind of shot myself in the foot a lot of the time when making music, because whenever there was an idea that we had that came along that seemed a bit too obvious, a bit too crowd pleasing, I would deliberately sabotage it by giving it a really weird and obscure title. Or and yeah, I blame myself for that sometimes, because Hamish and Laura had really great instincts and would come up with these great kind of very hooky tunes, and I would sometimes spoil it by giving it a weird title or making it something that people wouldn't really understand very well. And I thought I was being clever, but I wasn't being very clever.
It's interesting hearing you say that and reflecting on that. I think there was lots of people at the time that would be just like you, that would say, I'm thinking of bands like the Associates, for instance, who, fame wasn't really what, well, I can't speak for them, but it seemed for me from the outside and learning now that maybe fame wasn't what they wanted. It was, a kind of cult.
Well, funnily enough, the Associates is a band we often get compared to as well. I mean, I'm not quite sure I understand the comparison, other than I think perhaps at that point we were a duo, we were Scottish, and we made a slightly strange music. I mean, but it's incredibly flattering to be compared to them. But I mean, and they were genuinely extraordinary band. I mean, they sounded like absolutely no one else. And,
yeah.
I mean, I don't even know who you would compare the Associates to be honest. You couldn't even reel off a list of bands they sounded like. They just didn't sound like anybody, and they still don't sound like anybody.
Yeah, I would agree. Are there any plans beyond these releases? You know, new music from Swimmer One, or live, or even, I know you released a solo single or EP even earlier this year. What's your plans is basically what I'm saying in that really long question.
Oh, I don't know if there are any, to be honest. I mean, you know, I don't think we're very likely to play live. I mean, Laura and I live in the Outer Hebrides. Hamish lives in Edinburgh. We all have kids. And so I think if there was a really obvious demand for live shows, I think if people were going, please let Swimmer One play live again, then in a very obvious sort of way, then we might try and move mountains to make it happen and get over the obvious kind of impracticalities of trying to get together in the same room and rehearse a show. But I mean, I don't see that happening. There's been a little kind of nice little trickle of interest around these re-releases as sort of on the level that we'd expect. I mean, people who liked us at the time seemed very pleased to have us back in a little way. But no, I don't think it's likely there'll be a live show unless there's a sudden rush of interest. As for new stuff, I don't know. I mean, we're all quite busy with our own thing, really. I mean, Hamish has lots of other recordings that he kind of continues to make. I think if there's something among that we all think, yes, let's do something with that, then we might do. We did actually have 2 new songs in progress, and we were going to put out 2 at one point, and then the other one just didn't quite come together. We couldn't quite agree on where it was going to go and what the direction it was going to go in. But that, you know, if we can figure that out, then that might appear at some point. It was actually a sequel to Larg's Hum, which was one of our kind of best known songs, which always went down very well live. Which appropriately kind of catching up with the person in the Larg's Hum 20 years on, and kind of look at what they're doing now. but we haven't quite figured out how to make that work yet, and I'm not convinced there's a huge audience for a lot of people wondering what happened to that person in that song that Swimmer One released in 2007. You know, it's not. I don't think it's a burning question in popular culture. So whether that will come out or not, I don't know.
That sounds like the beginning of a thesis that someone might write, an obscure thesis. So in a moment, we're going to hear We Just Make Music for Ourselves, but do you think that the success, or at least the attention that got, was a kind of hindrance in a way, because you didn't have the album sitting ready to go or anything like that?
I wouldn't say it was a hindrance. I would never describe any kind of success as a hindrance. I would, you know, I'd like to have more success to be a hindrance. Yeah. I think we just weren't ready. You know, I mean, we were very, at that point we were very much a studio act. And we were just playing around with ideas, and We Just Make Music was the first thing that we came up with. We thought, oh, that works. That's really good. We had like an EP of other stuff about a year before, which didn't quite hit the spot, and that song really hit the spot. And I was delighted when it really seemed to connect with people. So people seem to really like it. But I don't know, maybe we never quite hit that formula again, or maybe our timing wasn't right, but I mean, like I say, it took us 3 years to come up with a live show and 5 years to come up with an album. By that time, people had sort of moved on a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people still think that's our best song, and maybe it is. I mean, I said that I always tended to sabotage things by sort of overcomplicating them lyrically, and I think maybe We Just Make Music for Ourselves does that a little bit too. It's a bit arch. It's a bit kind of referring to. I mean, you know, the title is from things that people always used to say in interviews. You know, you get these boring pop band interviews where they just say, "We just make music for ourselves." So it was a joke about that, but hopefully it transcended that, because it was about something a bit more emotional and that you could connect with. This is a very long answer to what was probably supposed to be a very short question. Sorry.
Not at all. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Alice. I'm delighted when anyone takes an interest, really, and so yeah, thank you for asking some lovely questions.
And this is Swimmer One, and We Just Make Music for Ourselves.